In the late 90s, Creed became one of the most popular rock bands in the world. Fans were enthralled by Creed's new blend of rock, but it was the lyrics, penned by lead singer Scott Stapp, that touched them most profoundly.
You know, I would feel a connection with God when I wrote the words. And then when I would sing the songs, learning the songs, I would feel the Holy Spirit.
The band got its start on the campus of Florida State, but it didn't take long before Creed was an international success. Their first album, My Own Prison, soon went platinum.
What was that like for you when it started happening at such a dizzying pace?
I enjoyed it. The band enjoyed it. You know, in my view, that's what was supposed to happen. Ironically, although I was living this lifestyle and caught up in the mentality of rock and roll superstardom, when I was alone and writing, I would pray to God, pray to my Father, and make deals. And one of the deals that I made was, Father, I promise I'll stay true to you in my words and the lyrics that I write. Just make us a success.
It would seem that God answered his prayers. Creed released 2 more albums, Human Clay and Weathered, both of which also went platinum. But by then, Scott had become addicted to alcohol and prescription drugs. He was also fighting an internal battle that was tearing him apart.
I was a Christian who was in rebellion and running from the brand of Christianity that I was raised on.
Scott hadn't always run from his faith. As a young boy, he learned from his grandfather about a loving God. But after his parents divorced and his mom remarried, Scott looked to a new source of spiritual guidance, his stepfather, Steve Stapp.
It was very strict, very disciplinarian, very corporal punishment, very military. And the punishments began to get more severe, more routine, you know, going into, you know, being locked in my room for a month, being fed under the door or crack the door, and then, you know, getting whipped, beat every Monday night.
What do you do with that information that you're getting? This constant back and forth. God's the God of love. He's not a God of love. He's a God of anger. I mean, how do you process that?
And I told God, I can't do it. I just can't do it. And so I ran from it.
After high school, Scott went to college, where he discovered a whole new world, one that included marijuana, alcohol, and sex.
Did you find it just somehow medicated these feelings of confusion and anger that you had?
Most definitely did. I wanted to run and experience this acceptance I thought everybody else had.
He also developed a passion for music and later helped form Creed.
It became an obsession, if you will, and it was my way out.
It wasn't long before Scott was a superstar. In the midst of this, he married and had a son, Jagger. But he and his wife soon divorced. The demands of superstardom and being a single dad pushed him into depression and more drug and alcohol abuse.
My body began to feel like it didn't have the energy that it had. I didn't want to get out of bed.
Where was God in all of this in your life?
Only when I would sit down at that point in time to write my lyrics for an album. But it's ironic that every time I sat down in a song that was addressing a spiritual issue or me wrestling with my beliefs or my faith, it would always be resolved at the end.
His faith-based lyrics led many to believe that Creed was a Christian band, but they weren't, and his bandmates resented it. Soon it was clear that the band could no longer stay together. Scott took some time off to clear his head and give up the drugs. A year later, he met Jacqueline, who was a devoted Christian. For a while, he managed to stay sober, but the depression returned, and again, he tried to ward off the despair with alcohol and drugs. But Jacqueline did something no one had done before.
She showed you grace.
She did. Tremendous grace and compassion.
What does that mean to you that God loved you enough to send someone to extend that grace to you at that time in your life?
It means everything to me. I didn't even understand it. I would see her and see her mother and her family, and I was just drawn to something.
After another night of binge drinking and drugs, Scott checked into a Miami hotel. But he became paranoid and thought the police were coming to get him. So he climbed on his balcony, trying to escape to the floor below. He lost his footing, and he fell 40 feet.
Inevitably, I land in a ledge specifically designed to catch seagull waste. And I really felt, even in that moment, that's where I belonged. And it was a real epiphany as I laid there and cried out to God and asked for help.
Amazingly, Scott survived the fall, even though he had severe head trauma and other injuries. He woke up later at the hospital.
I opened my eyes and they were blurry, and I see two angels. And I'm kind of doing this, and it's Jacqueline and her mother, and they're washing my feet. They're washing the dirt and the blood and everything off my feet, crying, sobbing, and praying. And I get goosebumps talking about it. If there was any doubt who these women were and what they meant in my life, and I'll go to my grave feeling this, that they were sent. You know, they were angels in my life and sent for me. There was no doubt after that moment.
Finally, Scott realized it was time to change. With the help of Jacqueline, her mother, and God, Scott got off the drugs and healed emotionally. He and Jacqueline married and now have a beautiful blended family. Scott has since released a solo album and a book about his journey called Sinner's Creed.
The redemption, as I feel it and I understand it, is God taking this mess that I had become and creating it and turning it into a message. God is there. And if my life can be an example of God taking the unlovable, and God can love anybody. And you just gotta come, gotta surrender.